Welcome to another edition of Cybersecurity Divas Leadership Moments with Lyndrel Downs. Today's edition is brought to you by Fortify Experts, a cybersecurity search and consulting firm that helps companies build high-performing security and risk teams.
Today, Lynn will be speaking with Karen Holmes, VP and CISO of TrueBlue Workforce Solutions.
Now here's Lynn.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lyndrel Downs. I'm with Cybersecurity Divas, founder of Cybersecurity Divas. I work for Fortify Expert as a recruiter, but this channel is for our divas. They are driven, inspirational, visionary, that take action in cybersecurity. And I have one of them on the line. Her name is Karen Holmes. Karen, tell me something about yourself.
So I've come up through the ranks. I did not always start in cyber. Cyber just spoke to me, and it kind of just happened in my career. Honestly, as a result of Sarbanes-Oxley, of all crazy things, and building control frameworks. And I think the most important thing I can tell you about myself is the environment I like to foster with my cyber individuals is the whole idea of, I have a crazy idea that just might work. And, one of the things that I say all the time to my board of directors, the other directors on a board I sit on, is that the bad guys only have to be right once. We have to be right every time. So listening to the engineers, you don't know everything, and just taking those crazy ideas and planting them and seeing what grows.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I love that advice. It's actually great advice. And so you see you came up a different route in cybersecurity. I know you're a Navy girl, so great. I love it. Thanks for your service. How did that entail you going into the cyber world?
So it really started with, as I said, Sarbanes-Oxley. I was working in banking at the time, Basel II, banking accords, and just really understanding what controls we had in place over financial reporting and over personally identifiable information, and really building that framework inside cybersecurity for the organization I was working for. And then my next organization was promoted into a director role, and cyber came under me in that space and really started digging deep into it. And again, starting planting those seeds of, well, that's the way we've always done it, but that's 20 years old. What's new? How can we consolidate? How can we automate? And that's just continued to progress until my latest role is CISO at TrueBlue Incorporated. So it was a little bit iterative, but always enjoyed poking things with a stick, and really looking at, how do we know? Where are the controls in place? And how do we control our environment without hamstringing and handcuffing everybody in the organization? I mean, we can build the most secure network on the planet, but no one would be able to use it, right? But it's super secure, but you can't do your job. So it's finding that balance to yes, where you're secure, you're compliant, you're meeting the privacy regulations, but people can still do their jobs. Right. And that's again where the crazy idea comes in, because you can't be the power of no. You've got to be that person to, let's figure out a way to yes.
During your career, did you have many mentors?
So I've had some great mentors, great female and male mentors. But one of the greatest pieces of advice I could give anybody coming up is, don't just look at the really great leaders you've worked for, look at the really crappy people you've worked for too. And I've actually almost learned more from some really bad leaders I've worked for. And that really, more than anything else, evolved my leadership skills, because when you're working for somebody who's just really awesome, you don't really think about it. Right. But you think about the person who is like, why is this person in this job, and why don't they listen? And, I remember a particular incident where I was literally standing in front of my CIO telling him, this is a problem. This is a huge security problem. And the director over the application's like, she's just making a big deal out of it. It's not a big deal. And then it quickly became a big deal. And he looked at me and said, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, no, no, no. I told you. I was literally standing in your office, jumping up and down. And he made the comment of, well, you should have let me know it was really important and not just important. So again, that's just taking that and always listening to that dissenting voice, because he wasn't listening to the dissenting voice in that conversation until it blew up in our face. So take from the instances where you worked for somebody who you felt failed you, and make sure you don't fail your people in the same way. You'll find your own ways to fail, you know?
Yeah, I do understand that one. What has been your greatest challenge in your career?
Making security a priority earlier in my career as far as the organization goes. I mean, security is like your auto insurance. You don't really think about it until you need it, and then you realize you have crappy coverage, and now you don't have a car. So, you know, getting leadership and boards of directors to invest in cybersecurity, because it doesn't generate revenue, right? It doesn't enhance the user experience or the sales experience or whatever it is. It's just expected to be there, very much like your auto and homeowners insurance or your healthcare, until something catastrophic happens and then you realize you weren't covered. So it's striking that balance between letting people know how important this is, realizing the repercussions of it, you know, and not scaring people so much that all of a sudden you're buried in consultants because they don't think you can do your job. So there's a balance act there, but that has been the biggest challenge throughout my career, is just getting executive leadership and boards of directors to buy in to the importance of it. Okay. I will say in the last 3 years, I have had kind of the textbook picture perfect board to work with, because they've listened, they've been on board with what I'm doing, and have been supportive every step of the way. So it's kind of been that dream team for me, where it's like they're listening and they're hearing what I'm saying and they're looking at the data that I'm providing. And it's just not always that easy. And that going forward is a huge challenge on getting board of directors to understand that this is table stakes.
Right. That's true. So what are some of your early career mistakes either you made or you've seen other cybersecurity people make?
So I can tell you a great example, because this one still stings. And this one was easily 14, 15 years ago. I had the CTO ask me to, really do a breakdown and some serious analysis on monitoring. And monitoring is just like a big one. Are you talking about security, capacity, throughput, availability? What do you mean by monitoring? And her comment was that it's, everybody's talking about monitoring, internal audit, external audit, regulators, monitoring. I need somebody to break this down for me. So I said, okay, great, on it. Kind of went old school, just kind of mapped our existing monitoring against the 7-layer model. What are we doing at each of the 7 layers? Presented it to her, and she said, great, let's just get this documented, work with everybody. And then I went to her senior vice presidents with it. It's like, okay, she said, to make this happen. And it was a shitstorm coming down on top of me from these senior vice presidents who were like, you should have talked to us first. Why didn't you talk? Are you trying to take over monitoring? And first, I had sent them my analysis. I did ping them and say, do you guys want to talk about this before I give it to the CTO? Crickets were chirping. There was absolutely nothing. So I'm like, okay, silence is acceptance. Big mistake, big, huge. So I ended up having to do these smaller meetings with these people, say, not trying to take over monitoring. What we've got here is tribal knowledge. We need to document it. That's all I'm proposing. And everybody was so spun up, and it was strange because it was obvious as I was meeting with them, they hadn't even read my analysis. So in retrospect, before I gave it to the CTO, I should have sat down with the senior vice president, walked them through my analysis. Just expecting them to respond was not sufficient. I should have printed it, set it on a table, and walked them through it. Personally, I think that shouldn't be required, but in this case, it was like, I knew these people, I should have done it.
How have you been able to reach the level that you are in this male-dominant world?
So one of the biggest things, so I got a great compliment from my CIO once. I was the only female director, and we were in his weekly staff meeting, and he made a comment, and it was slightly off color. It wasn't anything like call HR, but he's like, "Oh, Karen, I'm sorry, I forgot you were here." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "Well, I don't think of you like a woman." And he goes, "Wait, that came out wrong." And I said, "No, actually, that came out exactly right. You know, you don't think of me as the female leader on your team. You just think of me as one of the leaders on your team." So I said, "Don't apologize. That was perfect." And I guess one of the whole things, it's a bigger issue about unconscious bias and just taking your emotions out of it when you meet people, and hoping that they do the same and take their bias out of it, because you can't lead people if you've made assumptions, and they won't follow you if you've made assumptions.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just a bigger unconscious bias thing, and just try to take your emotions out of it. And people will surprise you, both in good ways and bad ways. Not all surprises are pleasant, but taking my bias out of it and making sure that okay, they're going to look at me as the woman in the room, so I've just got to be a badass. No, just walking into the room and not making assumptions about them and just assuming they're going to accept me for who I am and accept me for what my skill set is. Not assuming that I'm going to walk in there and do combat. You know, it's like, go ahead, underestimate if they do, but take your own bias out of it first.
What advice would you actually give a mid-level security analyst who's aspiring to be a leader or a director, or even like yourself or a CISO? What advice would you give them in their mid-level?
Find something small that you can lead and get in front of your leadership and say, "Hey, you know what? We're going to roll out a mobile device solution. You know what? I want to take this on. I want to start looking at tools. I want to start doing some analysis on this, and I want to lead this initiative." No one's going to assume you want to lead. You have to ask. And, you know, if you don't express that interest, everybody's going to be assuming that you're happy playing with the dark arts, working with your tools, staying up all night reading, you know, threat feeds. And that's okay, and that's great. But if you want to lead, you've got to let people know, I want to lead. So give me this thing. It's the blast radius is small. You know, if I screw it up, great. You know what? I screwed it up. I learned something today. But show that you can lead and express the interest that you want to lead. No one's going to come and knock on your door and say, "Hey, do you want to be a CISO someday? Come on with me. I'll teach you everything you need to know." You have to let people know that this is what you want.
What is the last show that you've been watching?
Dexter.
Dexter. I love it. I love that show. What about the latest book that you read?
It's a biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was kind of the first badass bitch in history. Look her up. She's like incredible. She was the mother of Richard the Lionheart, but kind of a ruler in her own right, wealthy in her own right, was married to both the King of France and then ultimately Henry II of England. Just an amazing woman at a time when women had no say.
Right.
They met movie about her in her older years, The Lion in Winter. Katharine Hepburn played her. She spent most of her last years at war with her husband. Not literally, but definitely figuratively. Just an amazing historic character. Highly recommend. Just like the original badass bitch.
Since this COVID has started, any changes in your work life there or in your job?
Obviously, we had to move an entire enterprise to working remote very quickly. Me and my team have always taken an approach, and I have a great a senior director working with me over my cybersecurity team. And so shout out Adam Geiser. But we have always taken the approach that work location needs to be agnostic. And I have an amazing senior cyber threat engineer who I've worked with for many years. Shout out Kelly Matt. We've always taken the approach that it needs to be agnostic. It doesn't matter where you are. And just personally as a leader, I've always felt that you can work on Mars. As long as you're getting your work done, I literally don't care. So for my immediate cyber team, it was not really a shift at all. Right. We had developed a stack that we could deploy quickly to the enterprise where anybody could work the way we did. So our shift was pretty quick. Obviously, I've been working at home. My husband also works at home. So we've been looking at each other for 7 months and we are still married. So we haven't killed each other. I have a running joke with him that when this is all over, hairdressers and divorce attorneys are going to clean up. You know, it's been a little bit of a shift, but I think it has been for everybody. I have never in my life been so thankful that my 5 children are grown and out of the house. So huge props to the people who are like doing their job and homeschooling and doing all this other stuff. I don't think I could do it anymore, but you know, necessity is the mother of invention, right? If you have to do it, you figure out a way to get it done. But it's been, I think I can speak for everybody where everyone's getting a little video call exhaustion rather than just doing drive-by conversations as you walk by somebody's desk with your cup of coffee or your water bottle. You're doing a 30-minute Zoom meeting and a 30-minute Zoom meeting or a 20, you know, and it's just, it's more exhausting in a way. And the other piece is, and this is a challenge I'm having pushing down to my teams, is shut it off. Right. You know, when you were working in the office, you had that physical act of closing up the laptop, getting in the car, driving home, and you had mentally separated yourself from the work. You had, I mean, you might log in, but it's not like, well, the laptop's there and I see the Teams thing flashing. I'm going to just check it out real quick. Wow. You know, it's keeping the work-life balance in check, I think has been the biggest challenge. I mean, for all of us, for me too. I was working at 11 o'clock last night and asked myself, what's wrong with you? Shut it down.
Yeah, yes. What is the biggest concern about the current state of cybersecurity? Well, cyber threats, sorry.
Well, besides the fact that malware now comes with SLAs, which is kind of terrifying. And again, it's always that next new thing. It's continually a game of whack-a-mole. And, you know, at a younger, she's a level 2 now, but a cyber threat engineer joined us a couple years ago and getting enough done, you know, and I'm like, wait a minute, any day that we don't lose, we've won. So stop putting so much pressure on yourself and just really focus on, hey, the Seattle Times is not in the lobby asking to speak to me. So for me, that was a successful day. You know, my name's not in the media. It's a successful day. And it's always going to change. It's never going to be static. This is a journey. You know, being secure is a journey, not a destination. You're never going to get there, right? Because there's always some eager beaver out there who's going to try to figure out a new way to do ransomware and a new way to get inside your environment and a way to get around MFA and SSO. And, you know, it's a never ending journey, but it's job security.
So true. What are people or employers not doing enough to keep the cyber threats at bay?
Really educating the end user. I know, you know, we've got mandatory cyber training and, you know, we do little emails and posters and things like that. It's hard to get the end user to really appreciate that they are the frontline. You know, it really looks great if, you know, you can talk about 0 days and malware and all these things, but it takes one user to do a dumb and it can take your whole enterprise down. And it really just foundationally, yeah, you're training them to do their job, but really foundationally making sure that that end user clearly understands about encrypting email and what don't you put in email and why don't we save things locally on our machines and it's really that end user. Don't click on the pop-up that says call Microsoft, you're infected. Guess what? Microsoft isn't calling you. It's not Microsoft. So just training that end user, because that helps them in their private life as well.
Right.
On their personal email. So they're the first line of defense, and getting to that end user so they pause and think before they click is the biggest thing.
Yes, I totally agree. Last question.
Okay.
What do you see the biggest opportunity to improve security?
Biometrics. Let's get rid of passwords. Let's get rid of, certificates and biometrics. Biometrics are the thing that I'm not saying it can't be replicated, but is going to ultimately be the most difficult. Biometric authentication, whether thumbprint, retinal scan, whatever. I think the idea of, okay, that's it, we're secure. I mean, that's an illusion. And I don't think we'll ever be fully secure, but I really think the next wave and where we really need to push ourselves is authentication through biometric.
Great advice. Well, Karen, I want to tell you thank you for being the diva you are, for being the person you are. You're great, and you have great advice. Any last things that you would like to say?
No, just keep fighting the good fight, people. And like I said, the biggest thing, bar none, whether you're a leader, whether you're coming up, keep an open mind, get rid of your bias, listen to other ideas. No one person knows it all, but as a group, we are smarter than any one of us is alone.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate everything.
Thank you. Happy to be a diva.